Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Michael Walker, and I'm joined for the first time in the studio. This is the first time we've ever met in real life. Ash Sarkar.
I've never seen you in all three dimensions before.
Isn't it incredible?
Beautiful.
Yeah. We've got so much to talk about today. I'm really looking forward to it. There is a doctor's strike on. I promised you on Monday I was going to try and get someone from the BMA, and I do have a deputy chair of they're not called the junior doctors, the resident doctors committee. Really interesting interview coming up. Unison have a new general secretary. She's of the left. This could be a big problem for Keir Starmer. Could also revitalise the British Labour movement. Jamie Driscoll goes green. I speak to him. And Greater Manchester Police and the Metropolitan Police have said they will arrest people if they chant Globalise The Intifada, even though it's not against the law. So I'm not sure how that's going to work. And on a more serious note, those Palestine Action, all those people who were detained for or alleged to have engaged in Palestine Action disturbances, one of them has been hospitalised on day 46 of her hunger strike. As ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Resident doctors today began a 5-day strike seeking more jobs and better pay. The resident doctors received a 28% nominal pay rise over the past 3 years. But after more than a decade of wage erosion under the Tories, they are still being paid less than they were in 2008, and they want a path to full pay restoration. And they're also protesting at the lack of training posts, which makes it harder for doctors to progress in their careers. Now, as you'll probably know, in a last-minute offer last week, Wes Streeting offered to create 4,000 extra specialist training posts and to legislate to give UK-trained doctors priority over international applicants. But he said he couldn't budge on pay, and an overwhelming majority of BMA resident doctor members voted to reject his offer. Throughout the dispute, Wes Streeting has been using incredibly and increasingly confrontational language to describe the BMA, calling them moaning minis and juvenile delinquents in TV interviews, which isn't necessarily a way to get workers on side. And after resident doctors voted to continue striking this Monday, he upped the ante again.
My biggest frustration with the BMA as I sit here this evening is that even with, I think, an entirely reasonable ask of scheduling the strikes in January for patient safety, they've said no. I think that is probably the worst thing the BMA have done since they marched against the foundation of the NHS in 1948. I think is unconscionable.
For an alternative perspective, I spoke earlier to BMA Resident Doctor Committee Deputy Chair, Dr. Thomas Cheliotis-James.
So the strike starting today is about two things. Firstly, jobs. So we've got 30,000 doctors applying for 10,000 training posts. We don't feel that is sustainable or appropriate. We've got 13 doctors applying for every A&E job, and we have record waiting times in A&E. It's not sustainable, and it's not good for patients or doctors. The second part of our dispute is around pay. So since 2008, our real terms pay is down around 20%. We're facing real terms pay cuts next year, as per the recommendation to the pay review body from the government. And our members want some sort of assurance and security that they're not going to face a decade of pay erosion as they have up to now.
On pay, I think everyone accepts there's been erosion, whether it's 5% under CPI or 20% under RPI, it's erosion. I suppose when people look at the absolute numbers, the question might be, why is it the doctors, not the nurses or other lower paid staff on strike? Because it's not a badly paid job, is it? 40K starting salary, 50K after 2 years, 70K after 5 to 8 years, 100K sort of thereafter as a consultant, if you go through those training places. I suppose, how do you feel about that, I suppose? That it's the doctors who are on strike and it's the other workers who are paid less?
Absolutely. I really have, I wish my public sector colleagues were paid more. I wish there was something I could do, but I'm here as a doctors' union representative. And I think it's important to recognise that a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we are able to deliver pay restoration for one group of public sector workers, then that is a really important thing to do. I'd also just highlight the nature of the job. You mentioned those pay increases that occur over time. It's important to highlight that they don't happen by default. They are only if you progress through difficult exams, in addition to working that you have to pay for yourself, additional projects, quality improvement projects, research. And now we're in a position where these posts are so competitive that you could have done a PhD, written a medical textbook chapter, and still not get into basic medical training to progress to become a cardiologist or gastroenterologist, for example. So I think it's important to caveat those potential salaries if you progress, if you pass all these milestones after a very competitive process, with the responsibility of the job, which everyone's aware of, people taking out appendixes of children in the middle of the night for £38 an hour. There's a lot of responsibility, and I think the pay needs to reflect the skills and the responsibility and the demand of the jobs, both for an individual and also from the public, from the health service. We have skyrocketing demand. We have medicine can do more than it ever has been able to do before, and we need the expertise to deliver that clinical care as best as we can.
Can you talk about the jobs issue? Because this is the one that's more complicated. And I suppose why it's confusing for an outsider to understand, sort of looking at the NHS, is we've got these two narratives, which is one, we're constantly bringing over doctors from abroad because we have a shortage of doctors. And then we've got this other narrative that apparently we've got all of these qualified UK doctors who can't get jobs. Is it literally people can't get jobs, or they can't get on training posts? Are there unemployed doctors sort of sitting at home because no one will employ them? Or is it about being on that training route?
So it's complicated, and it's a mix of things. So I'll take the training posts thing first. So the way the current system works is that any doctor from anywhere in the world can apply to these posts if they get a particular form signed off that is not particularly onerous. And there's no sort of discrimination based on experience or years of practice. So in some instances, you'll have people with lots of experience competing with people with little experience who have worked in the UK. And there's a big mismatch in terms of competitiveness there by design of the system. A really important thing to note is in this recent pay and jobs offer really was that there are reportedly 4,000 extra training posts. These aren't new jobs. There's no net change to the number of doctors being offered. It is repurposing training locally employed posts that don't allow doctors to progress in their career to become the surgeons and anaesthetists of the future. Instead, they're just taking jobs from locally employed and turning them into training posts. So there's no net increase in the number of doctors, which we felt was really important. And lastly, the exact proportion of the amount of doctors who are UK grads who don't have a job, who are international medical graduates who may have come over in COVID, built a life here, it's quite unclear. That's not data that's been shared with us, and we want more detail on that in order to establish if it's a good offer or not. And that's something that was lacking in the most recent offer. What we put to members and was soundly rejected by 65% of our members voted, and 85% of people voted no.
I mean, ultimately, because this is a nationalised service, this is a political question. And if you're saying a rising tide lifts all boats, it's not zero sum. If you get a pay rise, nurses should get a pay rise, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, as you've said, there's rising demand on healthcare. I think the NHS is going to be sort of squeezed on costs for a very long time. And Wes Streeting would say, look, I do want to give him a pay rise. He's not like someone who hates doctors, but he is constrained. Do you think the government has to just be honest and tell the public, if you want a decent NHS that can retain staff who won't go to Australia or Canada where they have slightly different healthcare systems, then you're going to have to pay all of you more tax, like 1p, 2p? Does someone need to make that political argument? Because, I suppose if you put yourself in the position of the government, they would say there are no easy options here.
I think it's difficult for me to come up with hypotheticals over how the government ought to run, the country. That is a matter for elected politicians to sort of talk about. I suppose what I can see in front of me are patients in trolleys in A&E, people getting auctioned out of canisters, people waiting hours for a mental health bed, people not being able to see their GP. And the choices are: do we increase the provision of the health service, or do we not? And I think there may be difficult decisions on how the health budget is allocated, but I think investing in the staff is one of the surest ways to improve the quality of the care that's provided in the health service and increase sort of the amount of operations and things that we can provide.
I know you might say this isn't your job to do this, but just out of interest, do you see sort of money being wasted? You know, if the options for Wes Streeting are either I've got to increase taxes or get money from a different department or reallocate money within the health budget, are you sort of, as doctors in the health sector, are you looking around all the time saying that money should be going on my wages, not on this sort of useless waste of time? Does that happen?
What I do see a lot of is a lack of flexibility in the system and absolute resistance to innovation and absolute resistance to change. You know, personally, for example, I was trying to get some AI scribe deployed in my trust, but there was so much paperwork, so much red tape, and that isn't necessarily the trust leader's fault, but it is an example of how there are massive efficiency gains to be had if we were to deploy technology more effectively, if we were to have a more flexible system, if we were able to have a workforce system that was more flexible to recognise the experience of doctors, for example, who aren't in training schemes but are capable of doing sort of surgical procedures or have a very senior level of knowledge when it comes to medicine. But we don't exist in that system. It's very rigid, very inflexible, and we end up serving the system rather than serving the patients that we ought to be doing. So I think there are reforms that could be done to make things more efficient, and I do think that would free up resources to invest where appropriate, and in some cases in pay or in working conditions or in more jobs.
I suppose what I'm trying to understand is, when you're talking about, and I agree with you, when you're talking about we need innovation, we need to use better technology, whatever, it sounds a bit like Wes Streeting when he talks. And I'm trying to work out where is the big disagreement? If this is something that can be, because I see sort of one way this could be resolved is we as a nation, which I personally agree with. I think we should. I think everyone just has to pay, a couple p more tax and put it towards the health service. But clearly there's a discussion between the health department and doctors, which is breaking down, when actually what you're both saying isn't entirely different. Like you're all sort of saying what we want to do is reform this so it's more efficient and there's less red tape and people's sort of skills are deployed in a more helpful, productive way. What's the barrier to you guys sort of working out some kind of solution that can be mutually agreeable?
There's a long list of things that have accumulated over successive governments that are now at the feet of the current health secretary. I think there is a fundamental lack of trust between employers and doctors. There have been, real terms pay cuts play a large part in this. People don't feel respected. They get flung around the country as part of their rotational training. They feel like they're a number in a system. They feel like they don't have the resources to do their jobs. They experience moral injury at work when they're trying to give care in corridors. And it feels like a death by 1,000 cuts. And we've had lip service from successive administrations saying we're going to improve working conditions, we're going to make the lives better, the working lives of doctors better, and multiple other groups in the NHS. But it just hasn't materialised. And now we're in a position where there is something tangible that can be delivered, in this case, pay and unemployment, that needs resolving. The jobs crisis and the pay crisis come together. And I think it is also very regrettable that after our last round of industrial action, we wrote to the health secretary. There were 2 weeks, immediately after we finished striking, we wrote to him and said, come around the table, let's get something sorted. 2 weeks, he didn't say anything to us. And then around a week ago, we got this new deal. I really am optimistic that if we can get in a room and talk about this with goodwill on both sides, that we will be able to find something that's acceptable to members. But we can't do that when the Secretary of State does not get into the room with us, which unfortunately, after the last round of strikes, it took him far too long to do so. So I can only hope that this time it will be different and we can get a deal done that we can present to members and put this behind us for years to come.
Do you think Wes Streeting calling you all moaning minis and juvenile delinquents has really backfired?
I don't think it is helpful to sling mud in the media. I wish that energy had been directed in negotiations with us in the room, and I hope it will be going forward.
It's a good day for the left and a pretty bad one for Prime Minister Keir Starmer. That's because Unison, the UK's largest trade union with over 1.4 million members, has elected a new left-wing General Secretary. Andrea Egan, a social worker with a 3 decades-long career, has beaten incumbent General Secretary Christine McAnay to the top job on a 60-40 split. She's done it on a platform that may reverse the union's historic loyalty to Labour.
Our General Secretary says she will hold Labour's feet to the fire. But if that's so, why does Unison vote for Starmer's positions at every Labour conference? And why has Unison given millions of pounds to Labour for little in return? And why has Unison donated to nearly 60 Labour MPs who voted for Starmer's welfare cuts? If elected General Secretary, I will oppose blank cheques to the Labour Party. It's time for Unison's subservience to Labour to end.
Egan had the backing of some big figures on the British left, including Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. It's safe to say she did not have the backing of the current Labour leadership. Under Christine McAnay, Unison was a vocal supporter of Keir Starmer, and McAnay was known to be close to Starmer's chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney. Under her stewardship, Unison became one of Labour's biggest donors, giving the party nearly £1.5 million ahead of last year's general election. And now Egan has threatened to end all of that, while also promising members she'd make it easier for them to run strike ballots. Back in September, John McDonnell told Novara Media this about what Egan's leadership of the union could come to mean. So he said this: "I can remember a time when we had a Unison leadership that actually coordinated other trade unions across the movement to put pressure on the government to ensure that they delivered policies for working class people. At one time, the General Secretary of Unison was one of the most influential people in the country. That's what Andrea could be." That, of course, was said during the election campaign. As an affiliated union, two Unison representatives have seats on Labour's powerful National Executive Committee, and with Egan now in charge, Starmer's grip on the executive may be weakened. A Labour source told the BBC, quote, "It makes controlling the NEC harder." Egan could now use her influence to ease a path for Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, of course a potential Starmer challenger, to find a parliamentary seat in a by-election. And Egan has described herself as a fan of Burnham, telling Politics Home he was, quote, "King of the North" in a recent interview. Egan, who had been president of Unison, also has personal history with Starmer's Labour. So back in 2022, Egan was expelled from the party, one of a string of expulsions or blocks on left-wing members. Egan's crime: sharing two articles on social media from Socialist Appeal. They're a Marxist group within Labour that had been banned, but it was only banned after she'd shared them. So it's one of those situations where they said, this group is banned, and even though you're not a member, if you shared an article from their website 2 years ago, we're going to kick you out. So clearly a very unfair thing to do. At the time of her expulsion, Egan told Novara Media this: "I've given over a decade to the Labour Party. It's devastating. As the president of Unison, my message to our 1.3 million members has always been around unity. Now, what message can I give to members when they've kicked me out?" In case you're thinking, she was already president. How can she be an outsider? President in most unions is a more sort of symbolic role. It has some power, but much more symbolic. It's the general secretary who controls the organisation, which is what Egan has been elected to now. Egan has been clear, though, that her issue with Labour isn't personal. Novara Media profiled Egan in the middle of her election campaign for General Secretary earlier this year. At the time, she said this: "Somebody said to me in an interview, 'Do you just want to embarrass the Labour Party?' The answer to that is no. I want to hold its feet to the fire. They are supposed to be a working-class political party." Holding Labour's feet to the fire has even included the threat to disaffiliate from the party if Unison's members want to. In a statement following her victory, Egan said this: "We public sector workers are on the front lines of chronic underfunding, low pay and outsourcing. We bear the brunt of it all. Unison's central task is to change that reality, our reality. This result means ordinary Unison members are at long last taking charge of our union. We will put faith in members' decisions and stand up to any employer, politician or cabinet minister who acts against our interests. Together, we will turn Unison into the remarkable force for change it should be. That journey has begun today." Responding to Egan's win, Keir Starmer said this: "Congratulations to Andrea on her election as General Secretary of Unison. I look forward to working with her." He definitely didn't mean that. He probably did mean thank you to Christine McAnay, because she has been a big ally to him, but I don't think he's pleased about this election result. Ash, I know there are people who say you're looking at a trade union dispute all in terms of Westminster and Labour Party politics, which I think is a fair critique. We'll talk about the industrial element of this as well. But in terms of this election for Keir Starmer, It doesn't look good, does it? Because you've got the two biggest unions, Unite and Unison, now both led by sort of very forward working class women who are very willing to stand up to Keir Starmer or cause problems for Keir Starmer.
One thing I'd say about Sharon Graham is that while she was known to be sceptical of seeing the value of the trade union movement as being solely expressed through its influence on the Labour Party, when it came to things like disaffiliation or how much money the Labour Party get, she's been something of a paper tiger. So there hasn't been any real attempt to exert significant leverage on the Labour Party. And I think a big reason for that is the Employment Rights Bill. So I think that there are lots of trade union general secretaries who sort of thought, well, actually, what's in that bill is the most important thing. That's going to be the focus of the trade union movement in terms of applying pressure to Labour in its first year or two in office. And then afterwards, we'll see. I think when it comes to Andrea Egan, things might be a bit different. One is, of course, the Employment Rights Bill has gone through. The second thing is that it is quite personal if you've been expelled from the Labour Party. Now, obviously, as General Secretary, she's accountable to her members. It's not a dictatorship. These are democratic institutions. But I think it demonstrates quite neatly the short-termism of the Keir Starmer / Morgan McSweeney model of party management. So trying to deal with what they see as, troublesome left-wingers in the Labour Party through the means of expulsions is that presumes that there's nowhere for these left-wingers to go, which could possibly pose a threat to the Labour Party. Now, I think 2020, 2021, 2022, that's broadly true. There isn't really a political home for the left. And I think that the gamble that was being made there was like, okay, well, fine, go join Socialist Appeal or whoever it is if you want. You can't really touch us. Now, the circumstances in 2025 are really different. We're going to talk about Jamie Driscoll in a minute, but in a way, I think that these stories mirror each other somewhat. Here's someone who's been booted out unceremoniously by the Labour Party, who's now found themselves in a position where they've got a greater ability to challenge Labour. So obviously, Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer, you could say, well, who could have seen the success of the Green Party and Zach Polanski coming? Who could have seen your party coming? But when it comes to the trade union movement, that certainly starts to look a lot more like McSweeney and Starmer were taking it for granted. That they thought, okay, well, if we expel you, Andrea Egan, president of Unison, that means politically you die a death. You're done. You're finished in this town. You'll never work again. Obviously, that's not true. And so when it comes to the seats on the NEC, or obviously the union dues that, Labour gets a share of, that's significant leverage. I don't think that they would have considered it all that seriously in 2022.
And do you think kicking out, we've said this a number of times, but kicking out all those people was an own goal? Because Labour could, obviously we've got loads of beef with this Labour government, but they could have a story to tell about organised labour. So they've just passed, it's just become law yesterday, I think, the Workers' Rights Bill, which was watered down a bit. I was talking to Dave Ward from the CW earlier today. They've been campaigning on this for years. And he's saying it is the most significant legislation on workers' rights in a generation, right? You get rights to unfair dismissal from 6 months instead of 2 years. Big change. Now, unions have a right to go into workplaces. Owners, bosses have to tell workers about unions. There's going to be sectoral bargaining in for adult social care workers, which people have been sort of, that's fairly radical in terms of sort of the British trade union relations. And they could be making a big argument about this, but because they've made so many enemies on the left, they're getting zero credit for it. And everyone hates them because they've raised, if they'd said we're raising taxes because actually we're a soft left, sort of one nation kind of organisation, but in fact they said we hate the left, but we're also going to raise your taxes, and now everyone hates them. So
2 points. The first thing is that for all of McSweeney's purported tactical genius, is that he forgot about the very simple fact of what I like to call the tent doctrine. This person who you are going to kick out of your tent, are they going to be more hassle to you pissing into it, or would you prefer them pissing out? And that's one of the things about political party membership, is that yes, it's a form of influence, it's also a form of discipline, right? There are constraints when you join a political party, both formal constraints and also informal ones about not wanting to, destroy your connections or your influence too soon. And that's also a part of party management. So that's the first thing. They forgot about the tent doctrine. The second thing, and this is to your point about the sort of unique, I suppose, incompetence when it comes to doing politics, is that I think that there are comparisons between the Employment Rights Bill and the budget, right? So in the lead up to the 2025 budget, you've got Rachel Reeves doing all this signaling of like, ooh, income tax, is it going to go up? Ooh. And then doesn't put up the headline rates of income tax, but freezes the threshold, so it's sort of a sneaky form of it. And you end up with this weird worst of all worlds, which is you've got a reputation as a high tax budget. People have been saying, oh, you don't keep your promises, even though technically they did keep this one. And last of all, you don't get the credit for the good stuff that you did do, like freezing, rail fares or scrapping the 2-child benefit cap. And so I think that this kind of comes back to the sort of, while it's not just him, I think that he's a catchy term for the Malays. Like Morgan McSweeney was very good at doing one thing, right? These Labour figures of Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, really good at doing one thing, which is going, what is the series of tactics that will get someone through the sort of factional battlefield and particular balance of power of the Labour Party? That's a theory of the Labour Party. It's not a theory of the state, and it's certainly not a theory of governance.
And talking about the industrial stuff, so I suppose one thing the doctor strike has proved is that workers aren't really in the mood to give this government the benefit of the doubt. Because I think, what Labour might have hoped is they say, well, we'll give them this initial 29%, which reverses some of the damages the Tories have done. And then hopefully they'll say, okay, well, we'll play ball for a while now. But obviously workers seem quite impatient when it comes to the fact that we've had 15 years of wage cuts. We've now got the Labour government. We want to get paid properly, please. Unison, actually much more than Unite, represent a lot of public sector workers. Unite does as well, but Unison is a public sector worker union. And that could be a real problem, right? If you've got people, obviously a trade union wouldn't say we're going on strike because we've now got this militant general secretary, but clearly it does set the tone. And you are more likely to have a confrontational approach when the leadership is willing to give the government a bloody nose. So if you've got loads of Unison workers who say we're not willing to wait for pay restoration, like the doctors, you've got a government that's saying we're not willing to raise broad-based taxes, but we've also got to stick to these fiscal rules. That could be a disaster.
Well, if you just take the example of social workers, right? So when you look at the lost pay for social workers, but also look at the increase of their workload and the worsening of conditions, what you have is a sort of resident doctor story in miniature, only without beginning from the point of more comfortable, more middle-class pay packets. There really has been a perfect storm in child protection in particular, where you've had, administrative support and management support gutted. So you've had more administrative tasks and sort of paperwork tasks being put on social workers. And despite there being clear guidelines for how many cases a social worker is supposed to have at a time, a massive increase of their workload. And I do think that political cultures shift, right? And they move. One of the things that we were discussing while the interview was being played is that between 1975 and 2014, from what I can see, there weren't any doctor strikes in the UK. And part of that is because, you're in a period of pay growth for doctors. That's an inherently optimistic thing. But, militancy in one sector can often start moving the sort of disposition in another. And I think that while you've had the attitude amongst many social workers that, well, we don't really want to go on strike because that puts kids at risk, is that once things start shifting a bit with the BMA, and it's like, okay, well, if doctors are doing it, could set off a whole chain reaction across the public sector.
Yeah, which is going to be very difficult for the government. Whoever takes charge, even if Keir Starmer goes, and even if Andy Burnham does manage to get a seat, what did you think of the idea that they were... So that,
but on that, just very quickly.
Sorry, go on.
So very, very quickly on that, I think, politics is a game of vibes as much as anything else. And the thing is that you've got Keir Starmer coming in being like, I'm going to be really right wing, right? So the tone set by Keir Starmer after he becomes Labour leader is absolutely fuck the left,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to be seen as one of these, namby-pamby, soft on the left, soft on the unions, soft on social progressives kind of people. So then even if you're doing fairly sizable public sector pay awards in your first year of government, which is what they did do, but you're sort of signalling to, the Sun and the Times, whoever it is, like, no, I'm actually really hard-nosed, you end up not getting the credit for it. And I can imagine a world in which, Andy Burnham or Angela Rayner or somebody comes into government. The substance of their public sector pay awards isn't very different, but the rhetoric and the sort of, the vibes around it are, and you end up getting a really different series of responses.
I just wanted before we move on to our next section, as our identity politics expert, who's written a book about it. Andy Burnham, the latest news in the New Statesman this week is that the NEC might not let him stand because currently 54% of Labour MPs are men and 46% are women. So they must only allow a woman to stand. Nothing at all to do with the fact that Andy Burnham wants to be leader and challenge Keir Starmer. It's just their absolute faith in 50-50 gender parity.
Don't you remember when the sort of post-Corbyn leadership race was happening, and it was Keir Starmer versus Rebecca Long-Bailey, and all the people who'd been like, oh, the problem with Jeremy Corbyn is that's yet another man in Labour history, when it's like, okay, well, like, here's a woman running for Labour leader. They were like, the feminist choice is to vote for Keir Starmer. So, principles, they're flexible and they can serve whatever purpose you need.
Yeah, well, some people suggesting, Egan winning in Unison could potentially smooth the path of Andy Burnham. Zach Polanski has proved himself an expert at garnering media attention and winning messaging cut through. But his party lacks significant government experience. That means their latest acquisition is a timely one. Jamie Driscoll served for 4 years as the Labour Metro Mayor for North of Tyne. He left the party after being blocked in 2023. From standing again, more recently, he had been involved in the founding process for your party. Didn't go too well, or at least his involvement. I caught up with him earlier today to find out why he's now switched to the Greens.
Well, politics is a mess. I think every Novara viewer will be aware of the crisis in the NHS, rampant wealth extraction, the fact that young people can't afford a home, the fact that we live in a country where people are literally being charged with terrorism for silently holding signs opposing war crimes. So something needs to be done. The only way you can do it is through collective action. The Greens have convinced me they're serious. They've been trying very hard to get me to join as well. And it seems to be that's a way through. You know what? We've got a lot of local elections coming up in May next year. We have to be ready for them. Who knows where we're going to be by 2029. But, if I can be useful, then that's what I want to do.
And this will be your third party in maybe as many years. So you left the Labour Party because very legitimately, you left the Labour Party, let's say, because they blocked you from standing as the North East Mayor, even though you were a mayor which covered, in an area which covered lots of that region. You then were involved in the founding of your party, although that all ended somewhat acrimoniously. I mean, how much do you want to say about, what happened in your party? I suppose just to be clear to our audience, you were kind of involved in organising it, and then you were sort of controlled one of the companies which ended up being sort of in dispute between the Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn factions. Were you just burned by the experience, really?
There are some good people in your party, there really are, who are trying to do the best thing. And politically, I'm not sure how much difference there is between Labour Party, when I was in it, when I was elected, had a programme of nationalising the utilities, of a 4-day week, of all the things that, whether you're radical social democrats or whether you are democratic socialists who recognising that, you can only move so fast. Everything was compatible. I think your party, at least a lot of the people in your party want that. A lot of people in the Green Party want that. So politically, I don't think there's actually that much difference. Really what it is, how quickly you're going to get stuff done. And it's fair to say that, even the people in your party are thinking, it's going to be some while before we can convince the British public to vote for us.
Are you planning to stand for elected office? Presumably you've got a fair amount of name recognition in parts of the North East.
Yeah. Well, in the mayoral campaign in Newcastle, I got 25,000 votes. Labour got 26,000 votes. And that was before the general election. So my old council seat of Monument Ward in Newcastle in the city centre, I'll be submitting myself to... There's a democratic process, of course, but to be selected to run there. And then after that, well, we'll see what happens. I do think politics is incredibly febrile. You know, if you and I had a conversation 5th of July last year when Keir Starmer was saying, oh, we've got a 174 seat majority. And I'd said, or you'd said to me, you know, Reform are going to be 15 points clear and the Greens will be overtaking the Labour Party in some of the polls. No one would have believed it. So, and that was only, what, 18 months, less than 18 months ago. Where we're going to be by 29, I don't know. So I do think the Greens are starting to realise what's happening there. Most of the people in the Green Party have only been there a few months. And the idea that getting 4 MPs was a great success, I think, is now in the rearview mirror. And they're thinking, yeah, we should be thinking about 80, 100 MPs. And, you know, imagine in a hung parliament in 2029, then doing anything in government or in politics requires you getting your head around things incredibly quickly. And if you're new to it, you can be disorientated. So I think the more people have experience who've done something that we can get in, the better.
You sort of said there's a lot of uncertainty in politics at the moment. That's an understatement. And I suppose especially, you know, to the left side of politics, it's really, really unclear what's going to be going on come 2029. So it could be the case that sort of Starmer is still leader and that we're basically in a similar situation to that which we are now, where there's an insurgent Green Party, a very stale Labour Party. And as you say, even people within your party don't really seem like they think they're going to be fighting fit for a general election in the near future. But if it was the case that Starmer is toppled, someone like Andy Burnham or Angela Rayner takes the reins and Labour sort of has a shift in a different direction, potentially becomes much less authoritarian when it comes to selecting candidates. If it's the case that, let's imagine, the Greens don't look particularly competitive in the North East at the next general election, and you've got a leader who is more open to your kind of politics, I mean, might there be another change coming up for you? Do you feel committed to the Greens now, or are you sort of in the Greens because they, at the moment, seem like the most plausible alternative to a very sterile Labour Party?
Well, there's lots to unpick there. I don't see the change of leader actually would change the Labour Party that much. I mean, first of all, they'll do everything they can to stop Andy Burnham getting there. I know Andy well. We worked together a lot as mayors, went out for a beer a few times. He changed from, you know, obviously he was a Blairite minister, to becoming a solid social democrat. What could a solid social democrat leader of the Labour Party actually do when it's a party that's committed to wealth extraction? Is it really going to turn around and start bringing water and energy into public ownership? And would its donors allow that? Is there anybody left there? It's a toxic nest of vipers. Not only did they block me, in the North East, they removed Graham Miller, the leader of Sunderland City Council, who was elected by the people, because during my time in the Labour Party, he'd supported me. They got rid of Nick Kemp, leader of Newcastle City Council. So it runs much, much deeper than Keir Starmer. And as many have said, Keir Starmer, in fact, his own advisor says, you know, he thinks he's driving the train, but it's a driverless train. So it's not just about Keir Starmer. In terms of my politics, the manifesto I was elected on in 2019 and delivered substantially almost all of it, despite COVID, was compatible with Green policies then. The election manifesto I had in 24 was about publicly owned integrated transport. It was about a Green New Deal. It was about full employment on proper working conditions and pay. And all of that is compatible with Green policy. So actually, I don't think I've changed. I think the world keeps changing around me.
Zach Polanski in ways is quite green in a different way, in that he's sort of a new leader of a party. He's clearly working out his own ideas on certain things at the moment. Lots and lots is up in the air. Obviously, there's going to be, well, there has been loads more new people join the Greens. Lots of the people standing for election at the next election or in locals are presumably going to be, you know, relatively new candidates, people potentially new to politics. That means there's a lot to play for. Are there any sort of strong beliefs that you have in terms of what the Green Party should do and shouldn't do between now and 2029, if what it wants to do is put Britain on a better path and not hand the keys to Downing Street to Nigel Farage?
Yeah, and that's the objective, isn't it? You're right, absolutely right. It's got to be about stopping Britain becoming a fascist country. I mean, if we look at what's happening in the States, where you've got law enforcement agents kicking down people's doors or kidnapping them, essentially, that's horrific, and that could happen here. We mustn't think it couldn't. So the possibilities for victory are only possibilities unless you get organised, unless you come up with a way of explaining it to people that gets them over. Now, the advantage we do have is when you look at progressive politics, over 80% of the public think water should be in public ownership. About 72%, it varies poll to poll, but it's always of that order of magnitude, think we should have a wealth tax. And so on across pretty much everything the left would want. And the question is, why then does no one ever seem to get elected to deliver it? And a lot of it is because people agree with our politics, and almost all Novara viewers will agree with it as well. But when they look at you, they also have to think these people could run the country. So that when they're there in the voting booth and they're thinking, yeah, but will my pension be safe? But will these people spend my tax money wisely? That's where the Green Party need to push on. That's where they need people who can say, actually, I've ran the public finances and it all added up and did a good job with it. So economic credibility is what wins elections. And actually the reason, when I talk to reform voters or potential reform voters when I'm campaigning, they don't say, actually, I quite like the policies of the Reform Party. I've had a look at them and they make sense. What a lot of them say is, look, it's all a mess and I'm pressing the reset button. I just want someone else to have a go. So let's capture those people. And I think Zach's playing a blinder. One of the things he's doing really well is he's standing up to the questioning. Far too many politicians who have come from the left or claim to be of the left, when someone has a go at them, they say, oh, well, yes, I know, and they start to retreat. And he says, no, the emperor does have no clothes. We can have a wealth tax. Poverty is a political choice and we could choose to end it, and it is up to us. And I think people admire the bravery that brings.
Following the horrific anti-Semitic massacre at Bondi Beach in Australia last Sunday, police in Britain have today announced further clampdowns on pro-Palestine protests across the country. So in the wake of that violence, police in Manchester and London have said that protesters chanting "Globalise the Intifada" will now face arrest. Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley and Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police Stephen Watson said this. They released a joint statement. We know communities are concerned about placards and chants such as "Globalise the Intifada," and those using it at future protest or in a targeted way should expect the Met and GMP, Greater Manchester Police, to take action. Violent acts have taken place. The context has changed. Words have meaning and consequence. We will act decisively and make arrests. Police say that frontline officers will use powers under the Public Order Act to make those arrests, though they also say that current laws are inadequate. The Community Security Trust, which is a Jewish security organisation, responded to the police statement with this. So they said the recent terror attack in Bondi and Heaton Park were abhorrent, leaving Jewish communities feeling frightened and vulnerable. These attacks come amid a deeply concerning rise in anti-Semitism, which has created fear and uncertainty for Jewish people across the country. For many years, CST has called for tougher action against hateful and violent chants and placards at protests, and this announcement comes not a moment too soon. In particular, given the wave of terrorism against Jews around the world, it is intolerable that a call for a global intifada should be allowed on our streets. We welcome the news that this behaviour will now be met with arrests. This is a necessary and important first step to turn back this tide of violent incitement, and we hope that police across the country and the CPS will follow suit. Ash, your thoughts?
I mean, the first thing is that I can't think of anything worse for the rising prevalence of anti-Semitism than to try and create a connection between the safety of Jewish communities and Jewish people in the diaspora to what you can or can't say that's critical of Israel or supportive of the Palestinian cause. because I think that's one of the worst things you can do for community relations, because it creates what I think is a false zero-sum game, where it says in order to protect this minority group, the thing you have to do is curtail, majority or civil liberties at large, right? I just think that's absolutely a recipe for anti-Semitic resentment and anti-Semitic speech acts and behaviours. And I can't think of anything more counterproductive. But I do think that this has been a key tool in the arsenal of Israel's advocates and the Israel lobby around the world, which is they're not saying, okay, if you clamp down on this speech, it's going to make Jewish people feel safer. Far from it. One of the things that it does is that it sort of raises the temperature in the diaspora, which strengthens Israel's, purported justification for its existence, which is you're never going to feel safe or integrated or welcome in any of the other places in which you may live. It can only be here. So I think that kind of counterproductiveness is absolutely intentional. Second point, which is about the term intifada itself. What does intifada mean? Is it always a call for violence? Is it not? Our idea of what intifada means as non-Arabic speakers is obviously highly reductive. And in terms of how we understand it in the news cycle, it tends to be based on quite an ahistorical understanding. So the idea that intifada can only mean violence and it can only mean attacks on Jewish people. One is that that's a sort of perception shaped through repetition, right? The same way from the river to the sea, well, that's anti-Semitic. There's very poor evidence for it. It's just something which is said over and over again. Similar things gone on with intifada. It's also, of course, shaped by the second intifada. Second intifada is, defined in many ways by the use of suicide bombings as a tactic by Hamas and other militant groups. But the first intifada, which took place in the 1980s, employed a very different set of tactics, and its disintegration into violence really comes after the sort of layer of intellectuals and activists and leaders in Palestinian civil society were all arrested. And so I just want to read something very quickly about the first intifada. Jimmy Carter, former United States president, wrote that the Palestinians' non-violent resistance in the First Intifada contested military occupation from a store of classic methods used on every continent in today's world, as people fight for human rights and justice with concern for the connection between the ends and means. He added that the use of concerted non-violent action offers a basis for transformation of conflict to peace building. So this narrative that pro-Israel advocates, Mark Rowley, amongst others, that they're trying to push of intifada only means violence. Tell that to Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, when was he saying that?
So this was, I don't know when exactly it was written, but the thing I'm saying is this, which is the word intifada is like uprising. It would be like saying you have to criminalize the use of the word uprising because an uprising can only be violent. Whereas, of course, you can point to different instances in history where you go, no. Yeah.
No, I think arresting people for it is ridiculous. It's clearly not incitement. But I wouldn't sort of shout globalise the intifada, because I do think that obviously people listening to it will associate it with the second intifada, which did involve suicide bombings. And then if you're saying globalise that, I can see how the associations are drawn. I think it's very different from the river to the sea, which always gets brought into this, which I think is very clearly, like when people say, oh, that's a chant for the genocide of Jews. That's just nonsense. That's completely ridiculous. Globalise the intifada, I think I can see why that does make people feel uncomfortable, even if I absolutely think it should not be banned.
But the thing is that I think that there is a point to be made here, which is that unless you are that person doing the chant, or you're that person who's leading the chant, when there is such a rich and varied history of the word being used, you can't, I think, definitively say what intent is. You might be able to say, well, this is the effect of it. But I don't think you can police intent in that way and say, well, the reason why you're using it is because of its associations with the second intifada. The second thing, and I think that this is sort of about the increasingly draconian use of curtailments on free speech to deal with political problems, is that the Palestinians have enshrined in international law the right to armed resistance against their occupiers, right? They've got the same right as any other people does for that armed resistance. I don't think that were I to lead that as a chant, one, it's not very catchy, but if I did, I imagine that there would be demands for my arrest on the grounds that it makes people feel uncomfortable. But it is a fact, right? It is a fact that Palestinians have that right. And so I think you have like this quite strange political problem, which is obviously, if you chant about the Palestinians' right to armed struggle, make lots of people feel very uncomfortable, it is also a fact in international law. And I just think that to get through that issue, which is it's fact in international law, but yes, I can see how it could make people feel uncomfortable here in England, is to go, all right, well, we're going to ban the use of this phrasing. Again, I can't see any better recipe for radicalization.
In other news involving pro-Palestine protesters, a hunger striker remanded for alleged involvement in a Palestine action has been hospitalized today. 20-year-old Qasser Zoura's condition deteriorated significantly on her 46th day of hunger strike, meaning she required urgent medical assistance. But it took prison authorities at HMP Bronzefield nearly 24 hours to authorise her transfer. That was even as relatives and politicians raised the alarm outside. Late on Tuesday afternoon, Zoura's health began to fail, with the hunger striker complaining of severe pain in her chest, lower back and around her kidneys. That's according to loved ones. Supporters also told Novara Media that her blood pressure had dropped significantly, while her heart rate was very high. Yet the prison allegedly refused to call an ambulance despite repeated requests from doctors and supporters outside. According to some at the scene, an ambulance did arrive at the prison around 9 p.m, only to be turned away. Staying at the prison through the night, supporters and medical professionals continued to call on the prison authorities to allow Zoura access to medical care, with some phoning the local ambulance services themselves. According to dispatches, though, only ambulances called by the prison according to dispatchers, only ambulances called by the prison would gain entry. At around 1:30 this morning, your party MP, Zara Sultana, joined family members outside the prison and tried to speak to prison staff.
Hello? Hiya, my name's Zara Sultana. I'm a Member of Parliament. I've been contacting the ambulance service all evening because Qasser Zoura needs urgent medical care, and I've been told that it is the prison that have denied an ambulance transfer for her to go to hospital. Hello?
Hiya.
Hello, did you just hear what I said?
Yes.
Can I ask that the prison immediately allow an ambulance to transfer Qasser, who's on the 46th day of her hunger strike?
Hello? I will consult with my medical team.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I understand that the medical team have given her an ECG and said that everything is fine. She requires urgent hospital attention. And I'm going to be just sitting outside until an ambulance is allowed in to transfer her to hospital. So I've just been cut off.
Sultana pledged to stay at the prison until Zoura received proper medical attention. But despite Zoura having been hospitalised just last Friday as well, no ambulance was called. An HMP Bronzefield spokesperson said they could not comment on individual cases, but gave this statement to Middle East Eye. We can confirm that all prisoners have full access to healthcare, including attendance at external medical facilities if needed. Any prisoner refusing food receives regular medical assessment and support from clinicians, as well as being offered mental health support. Fellow remand prisoner Amu Gib, who is also on the 46th day of a hunger strike, told Novara Media via an intermediary that their experience had been quite different to that, saying this. Recent experiences show that even though the healthcare team advises she be admitted to hospital, and even though she's been on 46 days of a hunger strike and she's at a critical risk point, the healthcare staff at hospital defer to prison officers who have no medical training at all. Suddenly they're responsible for her life. And based on their behaviour so far, I have no reason to believe they'll actually recommend the best treatment possible. They just want us all to be in prison. Prime Minister's question, Sultana's your party co-founder, Jeremy Corbyn, raised the issue of the hunger strikers with the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of State for Justice declined a meeting with the representatives of a number of hunger strikers in prison at the present time. These are all remand prisoners. They're not convicted of anything. Since then, a further prisoner, Kazam, has been taken to hospital, as have others. Many people are very concerned about the regular breaches of prison conditions and prison rules in respect to these hunger strikers. Will he make arrangements for the Ministry of Justice to meet representatives of the hunger strikers to discuss these breaches of the conditions that they're experiencing at the present time?
Prime Minister.
Well, he will appreciate there are rules and procedures in place in relation to hunger strikes, and we're following those rules and procedures.
That intervention from Corbyn was better received than a similar one he made on Tuesday.
There are deep concerns expressed by them, their families and their legal representatives about access to medical treatment and the way they've been treated when taken to hospital as well. To help the situation, would the Minister be able to meet their legal representatives and families if necessary in order to discuss this situation and try and move forward to help the safety of these particular prisoners?
Minister.
No.
It's pretty gross. Especially given that now, well, they'd already gone to hospital by the time he said that. No, not interested. Finally, after 18 hours of delay, HMP Bronzefield relented. So just after 1 p.m. today, an ambulance finally arrived for Zura, who has now been taken to hospital to receive medical attention. Shortly afterwards, demonstrators formed a blockade of police vans after a doctor who'd been amongst Zura's supporters was detained by police while another medic was allegedly shoved to the ground. In a statement to Middle East Eye, before the deterioration in her health, Zura said this: "I lie down with my hand on my heart every night, making sure that my heart is beating normally and that I'm breathing. All of this is just because of a lack of food in my body, but mentally I have no desire for food. I have no desire to eat. I have no desire to end the hunger strike. The only thing that I desire is victory in this and freedom." Kessa Zara and Amu Gib are among the 8 prisoners affiliated with the prescribed group Palestine Action, or I suppose allegedly affiliated, who are currently on hunger strike. All have been on remand without trial for many months, some over a year. Many will spend as much as 2 years in jail before facing a jury. None face terror charges for their alleged involvement in actions at an Elbit weapons factory in Bristol last year, or an action at RAF Bryce Norton this year, during which 2 refueler planes were sprayed with red paint. They are refusing food in protest at the prescription of the group, as well as the deterioration of their conditions following the ban this summer. Remand prisoners are supposed to be detained in freer conditions than people with convictions, including being allowed to wear ordinary clothes, unlimited visits within reason, and access to personal items. Instead, the hunger striking prisoners allege that prison officials have restricted their communications with the outside world, removed them from work and education opportunities, and taken away their personal belongings. Important to note, because whenever this is brought up on Twitter, everyone says, "Why are you expressing any sympathy for the hunger strikers?" And then they point to the fact that someone on one of those Palestine actions is accused of hitting a policewoman with a hammer. None of the hunger strikers are being charged with violence against persons, which is important, I think, to clarify. Ash, this is really serious, isn't it? Because it's day 46 for 2 of them. So the hunger strike that will be in most of our viewers, well, whether or not you were alive then, but in their minds, is 1981 with Bobby Sands and other activists with the IRA. They were on hunger strike because they wanted to have the status of political prisoners and various other demands. The first of their number died after 46 days.
Yeah, Martin Herson.
Which is the day they're on now. Bobby Sands, 66 days. So we are in the absolute danger zone, aren't we?
I think one of the things to remember about hunger strikes is that it's fairly unique amongst tactics for the kind of strength of feeling, and I suppose legitimacy that they build after someone has died. And this was the case with the 1981 strikers. Now, obviously, the 1981 hunger strikers of the Maze prison, they undertook that strike at a time of, a struggle of national liberation in which, there was embedded community support. I don't think you can compare Palestine Action to that kind of context, much less embedded in the community. The numbers are far fewer. But when you go back and you look at 1981, that movement from contempt, disdain, treating these prisoners as though they were, disgusting or play acting, absolute contempt by politicians and the media. After the death of Martin Herson, but particularly Bobby Sands, because at that time he was lawfully a member of parliament, it really came back to haunt the British state significantly. And there are some parts of the world, and I'm not just talking about on the island of Ireland, but internationally, where the reputation of the British state has never recovered since the death of Bobby Sands. And I think that that's one of the things that people fail to understand about the Palestine Action hunger strikers, which is, you've got MPs laughing when Jeremy Corbyn is demanding a meeting with the Justice Secretary. You've got people on Twitter accusing these individuals of basically LARPing, right? They're play acting at something that they don't understand. What they don't understand is that this exact contempt will indelibly stain the reputations of all involved if it is the case that somebody dies on this hunger strike. There is something very almost like retrospective about hunger strikes, which is when they're happening, a lot of contempt, a lot of dismissal after someone's died, because that is such a powerful demonstration of their seriousness and their commitment. The narrative does change.
Mm. I mean, it is like the dismissal of Palestine protesters. Like, when you look at the, even, I mean, I don't want to say, it's not that complicated. Israel are doing, have done, continuing a genocidal war against a pretty defenseless people. Like, it's sickening. But the stakes is, like, the combination of how high the stakes obviously are and how quick so many people are to dismiss these as sort of like attention-seeking children. It's like, trying to stop a genocide is good. Like, that's a good thing to do. And I do find it, like, I suppose I understand people disagreeing with the methods, which I don't, by the way, but I understand people disagreeing more than I understand people just saying like, oh, isn't this ridiculous? It's like, these are clearly people with a very legitimate cause that they feel very strongly about which the stakes are huge.
Because I think when you live in such morally degraded times, one of the features of it is that you make having a moral compass a mark of, embarrassment somehow. It's almost like a faux pas. Why are you trying to make me feel guilty? And I think that that's why when you look at sort of, professional, like, poo-pooers and buffoons from, Jeremy Clarkson or Piers Morgan, the things that they always accuse people of is hypocrisy. It's always, well, you don't really mean your principles. And what that's trying to do is sort of say, anytime you take a moral stance, haha, I'm going to come here and I'm going to undercut you. And I think that that's sort of, you've always had activists being disparaged in this way. That's a feature of 68, it's a feature of the 80s and the dismissal of the loony left. But I think it's particularly a feature of the sort of post-neoliberal era, where the idea of belonging to a greater cause than just looking after yourself is seen as somehow gross or disgusting. Now, I don't think that anyone looks at the times we live in now and think, oh, people have got more moral integrity than they used to. I think that people agree that actually moral leadership is a really important quality that we've been missing. And I think that's something which is embodied by these activists in spades. I mean, one thing that I will say about the way in which the story is broken through in the media is that when the hunger strike was first announced, I was kind of worried that we'd be one of the few outlets covering it. And the reason why is because Palestine Action prisoners have been so disparaged and they've been so invisibilized from the wider world, especially this matter of being held on remand for far longer than you're supposed to hold anyone on remand. This is now the second story in the Times today. Like, they've significantly broken through.
let's wrap up there. Ash, thank you so much for joining me in the studio today.
Thank you so much for having me. I promise I'm not actually ill. I just had my flu jab today, so I've got a runny nose. And
we're going to get you a new background for future episodes so that your hair doesn't.
I kind of feel, and I'm allowed to say this, I kind of feel that when my hair blends into the background, I just look like a floating Easter egg.
No comment. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.